They called me greedy. They called me selfish. And then, in front of everyone, they shoved a cake into my face while the cameras rolled. That clip went viral in hours, captioned, "Daughter refuses to help family." Millions laughed, but no one knew the truth. For years I paid their bills, answered their midnight calls, and carried debts that weren't mine. I thought loyalty meant love, until I realized loyalty only fed their hunger. That night, as frosting slid down my cheek, I stopped being their victim. I became something else. And by Christmas, they would regret underestimating me. I grew up believing that my worth was measured by how much I gave away. When my friends in college saved for vacations or a car, I was wiring money home to cover my father's medical bills. When my little sister wanted to study abroad, I co-signed the loan. When the roof caved in on my parents' house, I put my own savings into their mortgage. I told myself this was what a good daughter did, what loyalty meant, but deep down, each check I signed felt like a piece of my identity disappearing. As a teenager, I had been conditioned to step in whenever a problem arose. If my mother wept at the kitchen table, it was my job to dry her tears. If my father raged about bills, I learned to soothe him with promises I had no way of keeping. And when my sister, the golden child, demanded attention, I quietly stepped aside, telling myself my silence was strength. That kind of training doesn't vanish with adulthood. It calcifies into reflex. Even after I moved into my own apartment, I never stopped answering their calls at 2 a.m, never stopped being the first wallet they reached for. On the outside, people called me responsible. Inside, I was crumbling. Every time I dared to think about keeping something for myself, guilt wrapped around me like barbed wire. When I bought a new coat, my mother sighed, "Imagine what that money could have done for your sister's tuition." When I treated myself to dinner after a promotion, my father muttered, "Some people forget who sacrificed for them." My victories were always reframed as betrayals. I told myself they loved me, but the truth was, they loved what I could provide. The moment I should have seen it clearly came quietly, tucked inside a family group chat. One night, while scrolling through messages filled with demands and passive-aggressive jabs, a single text blinked onto my screen. "Oops, not for you." Seconds later, it disappeared, deleted. But I had seen enough. Words about moving things forward without her, about the apartment as if it already belonged to someone else. My stomach tightened. They weren't just leaning on me. They were planning to erase me. I tried to bury the suspicion. Surely, I told myself, I had misunderstood. Families didn't conspire like that, not against their own, but the signs only multiplied. On Facebook, my relatives posted long rants about children who hoard wealth and selfish daughters who forget blood ties. Though they never named me, every neighbor, every cousin knew exactly who they meant. My phone buzzed with pitying texts. "Are you okay? Rough posts from your family." I laughed them off, but inside, shame burned hotter than anger. Their gaslighting was a performance sharpened over years. My mother would call me her rock one day, then the next accuse me of being cold and ungrateful. My sister showered me with praise on Instagram, best sibling ever, while in private she whispered, "Don't you want to see me happy? All you need to do is sign one paper." Every compliment carried a hook, every smile another debt. The twist came from someone I trusted most. My best friend Clara called one evening with a voice heavy with hesitation. "Emily, I need to send you something," she said. A file landed in my inbox, an audio recording. I pressed play and heard my mother's voice, unmistakable, clear. That apartment was never really hers. She's only holding it until Lila's ready to settle down. My throat closed, the words carved through me, each syllable a betrayal. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was a rewriting of reality, a theft disguised as destiny. I sat at my kitchen table, head in my hands, tears soaking into my palms. How many years had I lived under the illusion that love and loyalty were the same thing? How many times had I excused their cruelty as stress, their demands as family duty? For the first time, I saw the pattern with blinding clarity. I was never meant to be a daughter. I was a placeholder, a workhorse, a living bank account. Still, part of me resisted the truth. Admitting it meant accepting that my family didn't see me at all, that the people I'd sacrificed for were plotting to strip me of the one thing I had built for myself. But the recording kept replaying in my mind, my mother's voice echoing like a curse. I thought of the Facebook posts, the group chat message, the cake waiting for me at that so-called family meeting. The puzzle pieces slid into place, ugly and undeniable. I cried until my chest ached, the sound raw and unguarded. But through the sobs, a sentence formed on my lips, quiet but steady. If this is the truth, I need proof. My reflection in the dark window looked back at me with hollow eyes, but there was something else too, a flicker of resolve. I knew then that I could no longer afford blind trust. If they wanted to erase me, I would force the world to see what they had done. I wasn't ready for revenge yet, not fully, but the first crack had formed in the mask of their love. And once a mask cracks, it never fits the same way again. The so-called family meeting looked less like a gathering and more like a staged tribunal. My mother had arranged chairs in a stiff semicircle, the cake placed at the center like a prop. Phones hovered in hands, already recording. A ring light glowed in the corner, aimed directly at me. I should have known then that this wasn't about discussion, it was about spectacle. Mark, my brother-in-law, slid a document across the table. "It's just paperwork," he said with a smile meant for the cameras. A symbolic gesture so Lila can start her family properly. The papers were no symbol. They were a quitclaim deed, transferring my apartment to my sister. $300,000 of security reduced to a sheet of paper I was supposed to sign under the weight of watching eyes. I laughed, the sound brittle. "You can't be serious." "Don't be an egoist, Emily," my mother snapped. "You don't even use the second bedroom." Lila chimed in, her voice syrupy for the live stream. "We just want you to share. Family means sacrifice, right?" The comments from the live feed scrolled across a nearby laptop. "She's so selfish. Imagine hoarding from your own sister, entitled brat." My cheeks burned. I felt the sting before the cake even left the table. It struck my face with a wet smack, frosting smearing across my eyes and lips. Gasps rippled through the room, some real, most performed. Lila laughed too loudly. My father muttered, "Maybe now she'll wake up." The cameras kept rolling. I tasted sugar and salt, not sure which belonged to the cake and which to my tears. For a long second, I stood frozen, humiliated in a way words could not capture. My stomach knotted, my skin burned, my pulse hammered like it wanted to break free. Everything inside me screamed to run, to disappear, but instead I reached for a napkin, wiped my face slowly, deliberately and lifted my chin. The frosting dripped down my cheek as I looked straight into the nearest camera. And I smiled, not the smile of surrender, but something sharper, colder, a warning. The laughter faltered. Even through my humiliation, I felt the shift. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea what they had just woken up. That night, after the performance ended and I escaped to my apartment, I made 4 calls. The first was to a lawyer specializing in property disputes. The second to a therapist I hadn't spoken to in years. The third to a certified financial planner recommended by a colleague. The fourth to Aunt Ruth, the only family member who had never asked for a dime. I documented everything, the live stream recording, screenshots of comments, the deed they pushed at me. I opened old folders and emails, searching for financial transfers, family spreadsheets, any pattern that showed where my money had gone. I began recording calls, checking state laws to be sure it was legal. Each step pulled me further from the helpless daughter I had been, and closer to something new, a strategist. One night, combing through files, I found it. An Excel sheet labeled Holiday Budget in a shared drive. Hidden in a tab was another title, Inheritance Strategy. Dates, projections, my apartment listed as an asset transfer. And at the bottom, the metadata showed who had last edited it. Mark, the smiling brother-in-law who had handed me the deed. The betrayal doubled back on itself. It wasn't just my parents or my sister anymore. It was the man married into our family, orchestrating with calm precision how to strip me of everything. My hands shook as I stared at his name. Rage pressed hot against my ribs, but underneath it, a strange clarity settled. They had left fingerprints all over the crime. Still, the anger alone wasn't enough. I needed balance, a place to rest my humanity so I didn't harden into a machine. I wrote long pages in my journal, bleeding ink about shame, fear, and the crushing silence after the cake incident. With my therapist, I allowed myself to unravel, to weep, to admit how small and humiliated I had felt under the glow of that ring light. She reminded me that healing was not weakness, that strategy without soul would eat me alive. I began to breathe differently, slower, steadier. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting, I was planning. Late one evening, with my journal open and my laptop glowing with files, I typed a message to Aunt Ruth. Christmas Eve, be ready. Then I set my pen down, folded my hands, and whispered into the quiet. This time, the show will be mine. I spent nights hunched over my laptop, the glow of the screen the only light in my apartment. At first, it felt like paranoia, scrolling through years of bank statements, but then patterns emerged. Payments labeled utilities appeared again and again, far higher than any gas or water bill should be. When I fed the data into a financial analysis tool a colleague had shown me, the truth lit up in red. Those payments aligned exactly with deposits made to the venue hosting my sister's upcoming wedding. I wasn't covering household bills. I was funding her grand celebration. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the numbers. Every month I thought I was paying for heat and water. I was really buying champagne fountains and floral arches. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It was quantified, precise, undeniable. Digging deeper, I opened an old folder of scanned documents I had once saved without reading carefully. Among them, a copy of my father's will, yellowed and faint, but still legible. His signature sat firm at the bottom, his handwriting familiar and steady. I skimmed through the list of beneficiaries, my eyes snagging on the line where my name should have been. There was only a faint smudge, an erasure so clumsy it looked almost violent. Someone had literally scratched me out. I checked the file's properties, heart pounding. Metadata doesn't lie. The last edit wasn't made years ago when the document was scanned, but far more recently. And the editor's name, burned into the digital trail, was my mother. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath ragged. My mother, who had cried about loyalty, who told me family was everything, had erased me from my father's will. My pulse roared in my ears as the thought repeated itself, like a mantra I didn't want. She chose Lila over me. She chose them over me. She chose herself. I pressed my forehead to the cool table surface, whispering into the silence, "Mother, did you betray me too?" The next morning I called Aunt Ruth. Her voice carried steel under its warmth. "You'll need allies," she said, "the kind who can see through performance and won't cave when they push back." By the end of that week, I had a small circle. My lawyer walked me through every document I'd gathered, building a case file thick enough to choke. A notary Ruth knew agreed to act as a witness when the time came, willing to stand in the shadows until the moment mattered. And through a trusted colleague, I was introduced to a journalist who specialized in exposing financial abuse, the kind who could turn cold data into a story the world would understand. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't standing alone against a wall of shadows. But shadows are never still. One evening, I opened my inbox to find a forwarded email chain, private notes I had shared with my lawyer, now pasted into a message from my sister. "Nice strategy," she had typed, followed by a winking emoji. My stomach dropped. Someone inside my circle had leaked to them. I stared at the list of names, my trust fracturing. Was it the lawyer, the journalist, the notary, even Aunt Ruth? Each face flashed through my mind, their voices replaying. I wanted to scream. Instead, I closed my eyes, breathing slow, forcing calm. If they had a spy, then they were watching me too closely. Good. Let them think I was still scrambling. I would learn more from their arrogance than from their silence. That night, I couldn't work anymore. I clipped the leash onto my dog and walked through the neighborhood, the air crisp, my thoughts swirling. For a brief stretch, the weight lifted. My dog sniffed at fences, chased a leaf, tugged me toward a lamppost. I laughed, the sound fragile but real. In that quiet space, I remembered I wasn't just a strategist or a victim. I was a person who loved late-night walks, who wanted peace, who still believed life could hold joy. At the corner, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Klein, waved me over. She peered at me with sharp eyes, as if reading the storm inside. "You're Emily Ross, right?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said, wary. Her lips pressed thin. "Your family, they borrowed from me years ago. Promised they'd pay it back. Never did." The ground shifted beneath me. My nightmare wasn't just mine. Their patterns stretched further, a web of debts and betrayals, touching even the quiet woman across the street. I tightened my grip on the leash as her words sank in. If they had done this to her, how many others had they left behind? How deep did their rot go? The wind picked up, rustling the trees overhead. I swallowed hard, whispering to myself, "It's bigger than me." Christmas Eve had always been a production in my family's house. Matching sweaters, choreographed toasts, every detail carefully curated for the live stream that relatives and acquaintances tuned into. That year, the living room glowed brighter than usual. A ring light perched near the mantel like a silent witness. Lila wore red satin and smiled into the camera with practiced sweetness. My mother's eyes darted between me and the laptop where comments scrolled, hungry for drama. I walked in carrying a tin of cookies, my expression calm, my pulse hammering beneath the surface. The envelope in my bag was heavy, but I smiled as if it held nothing more than holiday cards. I kissed cheeks, offered cookies, and sat where the camera could catch me in full view. The game had begun. After grace, the conversation tilted, as I knew it would. My father cleared his throat. "Emily, it's time to talk about doing what's right." Mark slid a fresh set of papers toward me, his grin wide. "It'll only take a signature, a new year, a new beginning. For Lila and the family." I lifted the pen, fingers steady though sweat dampened my palm. I even leaned forward, as though ready to sign. The chat on the laptop exploded. Finally, she's giving in. See, she does love her family. Then I set the pen down. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled the envelope from my bag. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice measured, "we should review a few things." From the envelope, I produced printouts. The Excel file with inheritance strategy, Mark's name stamped across the metadata, screenshots of group chats plotting to pressure me, bank statements showing utilities paying for Lila's wedding venue. A hush fell across the room, and then I pressed play on my phone. My mother's voice filled the air, recorded in secret. That apartment was never really hers. She's only holding it until Lila's ready. Gasps erupted. My mother's face drained of color. Lila stammered. I glanced toward the back, where Aunt Ruth sat quietly beside two guests I had invited. One was my lawyer, the other, Gloria, the notary. They weren't here for cookies. My mother lunged toward the laptop, shrieking, "Turn it off! Turn the live off right now!" But it was too late. Thousands were watching. The curtain had lifted, and the stage lights burned too bright for them to hide. The next day, the retaliation began. Posts appeared online, crafted to make me look unstable. Claims that I had forged documents, manipulated audio, fabricated the story for attention. Anonymous accounts repeated the lies until they blurred into noise. But I was ready. I released the evidence piece by piece, never all at once. A screenshot here, a clip there, timed so each lie collapsed under the weight of truth. The audience that had once mocked me during the cake incident now shifted. "Why would they hide this?" strangers asked in comment sections. "She has proof." Still, the war wore me down. Each post from them felt like claws raking across my skin. One evening I sat on my kitchen floor, a cup of instant noodles in my lap, tears streaming silently as I ate. The steam fogged my glasses. For a moment I hated how small I looked, how weak, but weakness was human. I wanted people to see me not as an unbreakable warrior, but as a woman who bled, who hurt, who still somehow stood up again. And then an unexpected crack appeared in their armor. One of their loyal defenders, a cousin who had mocked me at the family meeting, sent me a message. Attached was a voice note, my sister's voice, sharp and cruel. "If Emily won't give it up, we'll humiliate her until she has no choice. She'll fold. She always does." But I hadn't folded, and now, with her words captured in her own voice, their smear campaign turned to ash. The betrayal of a flying monkey who switched sides became the final nail in their coffin. That night, exhausted but sharper than ever, I shut my laptop. A single notification blinked on my phone. A message from an unknown number. "There's more than you think. Meet me." My breath caught, half fear, half anticipation. The game wasn't over. The stage was only growing wider. The legal storm arrived faster than I expected. My lawyer filed suit for coercion, attempted fraud, and financial misappropriation. Each document was heavy with proof, screenshots, recordings, bank statements. The same evidence that had once felt like a burden now became my shield. For the first time, the weight of years pressing on me shifted onto their shoulders. The courts moved cautiously, but social media had no patience. Within days, the hashtag #JusticeForEmily trended across platforms. Clips from the Christmas livestream replayed endlessly. My mother shrieking to turn off the camera, my sister fumbling, the damning audio of my mother's words. Strangers dissected every second, piecing together the betrayal I had lived with for years. And then the narrative cracked inside the family itself. During the preliminary hearing, my sister Lila broke down in tears, mascara streaking her cheeks. "It wasn't me," she sobbed. "It was Mom. She made me do it." Ow. Her words echoed through the courtroom like a betrayal within betrayal. I watched my mother's jaw clench, fury boiling beneath her polished exterior. For once, it wasn't me they were turning on. It was each other. But the most unexpected twist arrived not in court, but at my doorstep. One evening, a plain envelope slid through my mail slot. Inside were photocopies of bank records, accounts I hadn't known existed. Transactions showed money siphoned from funds I had provided, transferred into a secret account under my parents' names. No note, no signature, just evidence. Someone from inside had decided to help me, a traitor to their schemes, an ally to my cause. I clutched the envelope with trembling hands, whispering, "Who are you?" The question had no answer, only a micro cliffhanger hanging over my heart. But I knew the scales were tipping. They had hidden their crimes for years. Now the cracks were too wide to patch. Weeks later, the verdict came. The court found enough grounds to void the coercion attempts and to open an investigation into financial misconduct. My name was cleared, my property rights affirmed beyond question. But the true victory wasn't legal, it was personal. For the first time in a decade, I turned off my phone at night and slept without fear of a 2 a.m. call demanding my money, my time, my soul. I woke one morning and lay in bed listening not to the shrill buzz of family emergencies, but to silence, a silence that felt like oxygen, a silence that belonged to me. Aunt Ruth came over the day after the ruling. She hugged me tightly, her voice thick. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Then, after a pause, she pulled back, her eyes misted with something deeper than relief. "I need you to know something. Years ago, I was you. I paid, I sacrificed, I believed love meant debt. They bled me dry too." The words pierced me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All this time, I thought I had been alone in carrying the family's shadow. But Ruth had borne it before me, silently, surviving without anyone to stand beside her. Tears welled in both our eyes. She had lived my story, and I had finally broken the cycle. We sat on my couch, holding hands, crying softly as the city lights glowed beyond the window. That moment was a pause in the storm, a human reminder that victory is not just evidence and rulings, but the raw connection between people who survived the same darkness. Later that night, when the tears had dried and the quiet returned, I opened my laptop. Among the flood of emails from strangers, support, thanks, requests, one subject line stood out: book deal offer. I stared at it, my heart racing. My story, once hidden and denied, was now something the world wanted to hear. Not just my pain, but my survival. Not just my humiliation, but my reclamation. I whispered into the stillness, half to myself, half to the ghosts of the past. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. The first step toward peace was silence. Not the silence of shame or fear, but the silence I chose for myself. I blocked every number, unfriended every account, shut down every channel where their voices could crawl back into my life. My phone no longer buzzed with demands at midnight. My inbox no longer carried veiled insults disguised as updates. The absence was terrifying at first, like stepping into a room where the air felt too thin. But soon I realized it wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space to breathe, to think, to exist without their claws in my skin. I used that space to build something new. With the help of Aunt Ruth, I started a small consulting business aimed at people like me. Those drained by toxic families, manipulated into debt, stripped of their voices. We offered financial literacy classes, legal guidance connections, and most importantly, a place where survivors could speak without fear of being silenced. What began as a side project quickly grew into a mission. Emails poured in daily, strangers thanking me for breaking open a conversation no one wanted to admit existed. One day, while reviewing applications for volunteers, I noticed a familiar name. Mrs. Klein, my neighbor, the woman who once whispered about being cheated by my family, had signed up to help. At first, I hesitated. Could she really want to step into this storm again? But when she sat across from me in my kitchen, her face lit with determination, I understood. She didn't just want to help. She wanted to heal herself through helping others. And so my neighbor became my partner, her quiet strength anchoring me in ways I never expected. Together, we built workshops in community centers, collaborated with therapists, even connected with online survivor groups that stretched across the country. For the first time, my pain was no longer a private prison. It was fuel for change. But healing is never linear. One evening, after a long day of work, I opened my laptop to find a message from an unknown sender. The subject line was short, "Help me." The body read, "I have a family just like yours. Please tell me what to do." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. This wasn't just about me anymore. There were countless others trapped in the same cycle, waiting for someone to show them a way out. That plea echoed louder than any insult I had ever endured. I whispered to myself, "I'll answer. I have to." Months later, my life looked unrecognizable from the girl who once stood humiliated under frosting and laughter. I had built a chosen family, a network of friends, colleagues, and survivors who celebrated victories small and large, who showed up for me without demanding a pound of flesh in return. They didn't call me at 2 a.m. with emergencies. They called to ask how my day was, to share joy, to laugh without malice. And then, unexpectedly, love found me too. Not the desperate, manipulative kind I had known before, but something steady and respectful. He was a teacher I met during a seminar on trauma recovery. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was to encourage, not to control. With him, I learned that boundaries weren't walls to keep people out. They were doors that only the worthy could walk through. My story began to travel further than I ever imagined. The book deal I once dismissed as a dream became real. I poured my heart into every page, detailing the betrayal, the cake, the courtroom, and the rebuilding. When it was published, messages flooded in from around the world. Survivors told me they saw themselves in my words. Parents admitted they were determined not to repeat the cycles. The book wasn't just mine anymore. It was a lantern carried by many. Looking back, I could trace the arc of my journey like a line on a graph, from the abyss of humiliation to the peaks of empowerment. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't clean, but it was real. Every tear, every betrayal, every twist had led me here, to a life that felt not borrowed or conditional, but truly mine. I stood one evening on my balcony, city lights twinkling below, a copy of my book in my hands. My reflection in the glass no longer looked hollow but whole. I whispered into the night, a promise to myself and to anyone listening. You didn't just survive, Emily, you shine brighter than ever.